Hello and welcome to MindSight, conversations where we explore deeper patterns behind how we think, lead, and live. Today, we are going to talk about something that sounds abstract but actually shapes much of the world around us: complex adaptive systems. Let me start with a few images. Imagine a colony of ants trying to cross a gap between two leaves. Instead of searching for one another route, the ants begin linking their bodies together, forming a living bridge so the rest of the colony can cross. No ant gives orders, no blueprint exists. Or think of a flock of birds through the sky, hundreds of birds suddenly turning together, flowing like a single organism. It looks perfectly coordinated, but there is no leader bird directing the movements. And then there are financial markets. Every day, millions of people decide to buy or sell. No single person controls the market. Yet, from all these individual decisions, something remarkable emerges: the prices. Ant colonies, bird flocks, financial markets, very different systems, but they share something fundamental: order emerging from many simple interactions without a central controller. This phenomena is what scientists call complexity, and it raises an intriguing question. If many of the most sophisticated systems in nature and society function without centralized control, what does it mean for leadership? Today on MindSight, we explore complexity and why sometimes the best leaders don't lead. To explore these ideas, I'm joined by someone who has spent years thinking deeply about complexity, systems, and leadership: Venkat Narayan. Venkat, welcome back to MindSight.
Thank you, Soujanya.
So let's start with the basics. So, how would you explain complexity in simple terms? And as a follow through question, why is it essential to understand complexity in today's world?
Yeah, I think the three examples that you gave are excellent examples. And you can also add a number of other examples. There are infinite numbers of them. For example, the human brain. Singly, the neurons in a brain singly don't do anything. But when they get connected, certain things like start happening, like intelligence, thought, consciousness begin to happen. So there is no, how does it happen? So to try to put complexity in simple terms, what it really is, one way of thinking about it, it's a system with multiple parts, but that is not enough because you can have multiple parts that are all isolated, and that's not complexity. Or you can now go on to say it's actually a system with multiple components or multiple parts, and those components are interacted and interconnected. So that is one definition of complexity, but even that doesn't seem to be enough. The third is that it's a system with multiple parts, and those multiple parts interacting and being interconnected, and out of that interaction, something new arises, and that's called emergence, an emergent property. This has been the classical definition of a complex system, where there are multiple parts that are interacting and are interconnected, and out of that interconnection, something new emerges called emergence. But recently, people have discovered that even that is not enough. There is one more very important property that complexity and complex systems have. Complex systems, on the one hand, have an innate order and stability. Because of several interacting parts creating emergence, there is an innate order but that order alone is not enough. Innate in a complex system is also an element of disorder. The moment you take the disorder out of the complex system no longer survives. And this is why central control of complex systems is often problematic, because a natural tendency of central control is to control disorder. But complex system very much depends on a level of disorder. So to summarize, I would say think of complex systems as a system with multiple parts that are interacting, are interconnected, and out of the interconnections and interactions, new emergence happens, but the system is extremely stable and orderly and has both order and a level of disorder within it. So preserving the disorder is also important in a complex system.
Okay. So there was a book by one of the scientists at Santa Fe Institute, which talks about living at the edge of chaos, and that is what is a complex system. I think you are also hinting towards the same direction. So when you're talking about chaos, and maybe the rest for a common person, for a lay person, chaos means confusion. It might not be the scientific definition of that, but in layman terms, most of the times it is equated to confusion. So when you're trying to control multiple interacting parts, a way of thinking is you plan and control everything, and that is what many institutions do, so that you can predict outcomes, control the variables, and optimize the processes. So, what happens when we try to apply this linear thinking into complex systems?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, firstly, like you correctly pointed out, in our colloquial use of the word chaos, we tend to view chaos as confusion or something that is undesirable. This unfortunate idea begins with the Greek philosophers who thought cosmos was something, orderly, whereas chaos was disorderly. So, starting from there, the word chaos has acquired a negative connotation and a bad meaning, at least in language. But increasingly, thanks to physicists and others studying the universe and other systems, what chaos really is, it's not disorder. Chaos really is a system that is extremely ordered, but very sensitive to initial conditions. So if you shift the initial condition, things start happening. Like, for example, small shifts can cause a storm thousands of miles away. Small, shifts in the market in Japan can start causing ripples across global markets. For example, that's the idea. If you think about it. And the other thing is, we have to view life along three dimensions. One is nature, where for most of humanity we have been victims of nature, or we have been, basically controlled by nature. We had almost to accept the monsoons would occur at certain times, and there was nothing we could do about it. So we were very much at the mercy of nature. Starting from about 1700, we started with the start of the printing press and other technological innovations. We started organizing societies. And that organization inevitably was a linear organization. We had somebody in control, and then they had structures, and it was very much plan and control, a linear model. And actually, the 20th century was perhaps the century of the victory of that model, where nation states, plan and control, factories, industrialization, militaries, etc., became very powerful. So it's very understandable that emotionally, mentally, conceptually, humans are very programmed to want control, and also to want to plan and predict the future, and try to control the future. That has always been the case. Having said that, we are now entering an era of extreme complexity, and we'll talk about why we are doing it. The problem of a pure linear model and the philosophy of a linear model, the vertical organizations in a complex system, is that it actually violates the basic fundamental properties of complex systems and leads to suboptimal outcomes and possibly to dystopia. So this is where we will always require linear models. When we start thinking of complex systems, does not mean there is no place at all for linear models. There are definitely places for linear models. Those should be applied to situations where we have a great deal of information on what outcomes are achievable and how much social or political desirability or individual desirability is for those outcomes. Those areas, sure, if there is that level of certainty, of course we plan and we control things. There's nothing wrong with it. We will continue to have linear systems. That's not a problem. But then in many areas, increasingly more and more areas of life, whether it's science, in economics, in biology, in whatever, in public health, etc., more and more we are now operating in the zone of complexity. And in the zone of complexity, if you had too strong a central control, the fundamental properties of complex systems get violated. And the fundamental properties have been described by scientists working on complexity. One of the most important property here is that the different parts co-evolve together. So if you did one thing in one place, other parts are going to change. So it is important to allow things to happen. And secondly, complex systems have an innate method of self-governance. They are able to, create their own mechanisms for self-control, for collaboration, etc. Thirdly, through that collaboration, emergence or new phenomena arise. The simple question: how do the multiple neurons in the brain connect with each other and produce intelligence, produce thought, produce consciousness? How do different immune system in the body without central direction form some things? Those are the kind of, your examples of ants, your example of bees, your example of the stock market. How do these things happen? So I think what is really required is an intelligent application of the best organization for the best situation and best desired outcome. In certain situations, of course, you should use the plan and control, the linear model. If you have an operation room theater and something needs to be done on time and with a great deal of certainty, of course you need a plan and control model. In the military, if you're, of course you need in certain kinds of situations, but we need to figure out where there is complexity and how do we apply complexity science in areas of complexity so that we don't suboptimize the complex systems by applying linear models.
Right. So there is space for linear model and there is space for complex systems. But it's still Mencken, you often quote him, and I've heard it often by you quoting him, saying that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. So why is it for us humans so difficult to maybe intuitively understand what is complexity? Like we understand simple cause-effective stories, but not a complex system in this complex world. Why is it so difficult for us?
Yeah, very good question. Again, couple of things. Number one, like you correctly said, I think that quote by Mencken is very true. For every complex problem, there is a simple solution that is often wrong. What that basically says is the solution you come up with in a linear system kind of mindset does not work in a complex system. That's the point of that quote. So the question is, now your question is very, very, very important. And I think it gets deep into who we are as human beings and who we are as a society. For a lot of reasons, we are more comfortable with simple linear models. Whether it is because we are emotionally or biologically programmed that way to want a level of certainty, or is it because we've been programmed by various socio-cultural phenomena over centuries? I don't know. But essentially, let's try and think of what kind of skills are needed to navigate the complexity world, the world of complexity. Firstly, in a plan and control area, we want to know what the problem is. And then as a leader, we need to figure out what the solution is. We need to put together a team or a hierarchical structure to get things done. And then we need to hold the team accountable for getting things done. That has worked beautifully in factories. It has worked beautifully in organizations like churches, in the military, etc., or where tasks are very simple. But the moment tasks are more complicated, the knowledge is very distributed. The connection to the community or the connection to the end user is very distributed. So a good leader in a complex system, number one, has to accept that he or she is operating through a decentralized system where the real power is at the level of execution, not at the level of central control. So that is one great thing. So therefore the leader should avoid making decisions by himself or herself, but rather framing the question and allowing the individual component parts to make decisions. But that's not enough. The leader also needs to ensure, remember, in a complex system, what is most important is interactions among the different parts. So the leader frames the question, and the leader also facilitates interaction across the component parts. Okay, this is how a leadership in a complex system needs to work. The other major thing is, when you think about our minds, we don't easily conceptualize the abstract. We want to see things in front of us that are concrete, like this is your role, that is that person's role, etc. That's how we are programmed. But yet in complex systems, that we are asking the system to run almost invisibly to a large extent. The leader may not know everything. So that is very uncomfortable. And then, when you really think about it, there are a number of other factors which we don't come to us naturally. Think of certain simple mathematics. I often ask the question, what is, suppose you fold a paper upon itself 50 times, what will be the height of the stack of that paper? The majority of people are unable to give the correct answer because they are unable to conceptualize the power of the exponent. When you fold a paper upon itself and then again upon itself, and you did it 50 times, the height of the stack of the paper is an astonishing amount. It is the distance to the sun. It is about 70 or 80 million miles. And the reason for this is because the thickness of the paper is irrelevant. What really matters is 2 to the power of 49. So the doubling, and this is where the immune systems and the bacteria are a little smarter than us. They know the power of doubling, whereas humans don't understand the power of doubling. And that's what happens in a complex system. A lot of doubling takes place. The second is the power of factorials. Just think about it. Just multiply 1 by 2 by 3 by 4. Before you know, the number is 2 times 3 is 6 times 4 is 24. And then by the time you multiply it by 5, it is 120, and it goes on. So the more interactions there is, in a system, the more emergence is going to happen. And this is something we don't easily conceptualize. The third thing, unfortunately, we have grown up, maybe because of resource scarcity, with a mindset of zero sum, where we often believe that in competition, one side has to win and the other side has to lose. But in complex systems, that is never the case. It is often the situation of optimizing win-win. One side might win more, the other side might win less, but both sides win. That's called a non-zero sum dynamic. So essentially, in a complex system, you need leaders that can frame questions, that can facilitate interactions, that can maturely promote cooperation and allow a level of healthy conflict. Because when you have multiple component parts interacting with each other, there's bound to be conflict. And without conflict, there's no change, there's no progress. The question is not avoiding conflict, which is what happens in a simple system, that managers try to avoid conflict or to control conflict. In a complex system, you want the manager to healthily allow conflict in a very peaceful, respectful manner. So I think all of these are important. But again, essentially, we are not mentally programmed, or we have socially been acculturated to believe in the control and plan and control model of linear systems.
Yeah, but we could say if there is a system where there is no leader, no centralized leader, so each person is a leader on their own sense. So each person thinks very differently, and most of us humans think in the system one way of thinking. We are like emotional, intuitive. We are not the system two thinkers, not slow, analytical, deliberate. So what happens in such a system? Like what would happen? Like uh, would the system collapse because most of us are system one thinkers, or there would be a good interaction and something new would emerge because there are system one thinkers and system two thinkers as well.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I don't want to take a position that there is no role for a central leader. That's not my position. I would argue
Hmm.
that the style and the approach of the central leader needs to be different in a complex system versus in a plan and control system. That has a core kind of message for leadership, and that should probably be an entire podcast on its own. So number one, there is a role for central leadership. I would not deny it. In an ideal world, in a thought experiment, one might ask a question as to whether a human system can work without a central leader. A part of me, the utopian part of me, believes it might, without if the constraints are removed. But I'm also realistic enough to believe that it will not work. It can cause considerable, damage to humanity, and because for a lot of reasons, because it's we have acculturated ourselves with a certain way, so that may not work. So the question really is, what is the right leadership style in a complex system? And what is your other question? So your question was, would it cause?
Is it still a role? Yeah, is there still a role for like having a fast, intuitive, emotional way of thinking in this complex system
Yeah,
in today's world?
absolutely. Absolutely. I think both system one and system two thinking are required for whether it is a plan and control model or a complex systems model. I think they're both required. Because, the question is, again, this is where emotional control becomes important. I'm not suggesting that emotions or intuition or wisdom is not required. It's absolutely required. Emotions, intuition, wisdom, experience are absolutely required, because that is what gives us generative ability. Okay, but at the same time, there is also a place, particularly in a complex system, if the intuition or emotion was wrong, you could start off a war, you could start off a fire, but you could
Hmm.
also start off something wonderful, like making some unbelievable creativity to happen. So I think there is a place for system one thinking, but there is also a larger and larger and larger space for system two thinking. So the question is, a great leader in this situation, I would argue, needs to be aware of the importance of intuition, but also be willing to have the intuition checked by other intuitions, and know how to apply system two thinking for himself, herself, and the team, and then to know which of the creative ideas to facilitate forward. I think the power of a leader in a complex system exists. You still need leaders. I mean, without leaders, it's not going to work. You're going to need leaders at every level of the system, whether it's central or decentral. You're going to require leaders. But the leadership style depends on the specific scope of the work. If your scope of your work is largely complex, the leader says, okay, I'm stepping back, I'm framing the questions, I'm allowing a level of kind of interaction to happen, I'm allowing levels of creativity to happen, I'm going to quietly observe, believing that these things will, but I'm going to try to convey the tone that you all can work it out. And people often do. People often come with cooperative solutions. When they don't, I might again frame other questions. And most importantly, I will create the facilitation. Suppose I'm watching as a leader, there are certain parts of the system that is not talking to each other or not connecting. I might intervene to say, you guys need to connect. So that is the way of doing things. And I will monitor the overall progress of the system, looking for optimization of outcomes, not optimization of process. That is a very important concept. So suppose, for example, the outcome we want is high vaccination rate or low maternal mortality or elimination of poverty. We don't need to start off with a fairly strong moral principle. We promote the interactions. We see, the solutions might come from strange bedfellows. It might be an entrepreneur working on improving water quality. That's going to be the one that is delivering high quality water to the public, and they might do it for a commercial interest versus the government solving the problem. So I think we need to move away from predetermined beliefs as to how the problem is going to be solved, because we don't know. In a complex system, we cannot predict how a problem can be solved, or even whether a problem can be solved. We can't predict things in detail, but what we can do, and I would insist, a good leader in a complex system is continuously thinking about the multiple component parts, about the interaction among the parts, and about how to frame the question rather than appearing to direct anybody. is allowing a certain level of conflict and conversation to continue, will put in resources in different places to promote interactions, allow failure. I think when systems are working out, allow failure and create an environment where the different component, different parts, the different leaders at decentralized locations feel a sense of agency. So they make mistakes, make corrections, and that's the purpose of a leader. A very big principle in a complex system is a leader takes the blame if things go wrong, but the leader always praises the decentralized components for the things that go well. So if a leader can take
Wonderful.
that sort of an attitude where I will take the blame, but you guys will get the praise, I think that's a starting point of great leadership.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, lead by not leading, I mean, is what you're trying to say. Uh, and I do understand the framework what you have given for leading by not leading, but making it a very, very personal and not very abstract. From your personal experience, like, can you give an example where you have led by not actually leading, where you have stepped back instead of intervening, and how were you able to produce a better outcome? If you can think of an example which we all can relate to, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, one of the things that Bill Foege, the famous public health hero of America and of smallpox eradication, once told me was that whenever you enter a collaboration, define the final mile. So, in general, that's all I start with. I define the final mile. I know where we as partners want to go. Beyond that, I don't have a clue of how we are going to get there. I don't have a clue of where we get the resources to get there. I don't have a clue for who the people should be who get there. So I start off, when I start, I define the final mile and I resist the temptation to define the path or to define the solution or to define the players or to assign roles. I allow the initial process of anything that I start with the broad, undefined conversation. The almost seemingly purposeless, but there is a hidden madness to it. The purpose is we want to reach that final destination, but we don't know how to get there. And the analogy I often use is like sailing. You get onto your boat, you want to go to place B from place A, but you have no control of the wind direction, the wind velocity, etc. So, but you use the wind intelligently, sometimes going in the opposite direction, and then to tack back and get to your destination. So, a lot of complex systems is like that. So, I believe in my own life, let's take the example of the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center. We are organized as a network center. I might be the director of the center, but the work happens across networks, across partner agencies, 12 partners in India, other partners worldwide. It's across the Emory campus. I have no direct authority over any of them, But what I have influence by framing the question. I have influence by connecting the different partners. I have influence by identifying which person might be able to move certain parts together. I have influence in terms of creating the environment for connectivity, either through persuasion or through small amount of providing small amount of resources or providing inspirational stories. So the mechanism of operation, the tools available to a leader in a complex system is not central authority, it's not reporting structure, it is not by saying I will fire you or hire you or I can give you a salary increment, I will change your role. That does not work. What really works in a leader is the leader's ability to set a level of tone in the organization, an ecosystem in the organization, which provides an environment of mutual support for people, promoting cooperation over competition. Although you need competition with the quality of the product, you don't need competition between people. You want people to cooperate. That is a very important principle. You want to compete on the principle that you want to improve quality everywhere. That is very important. And so I think that is how things have worked in my own life. And I like that leadership because I don't wake up in the morning worrying about my responsibility and my duty, etc. I wake up in the morning believing in the inspiration of storytelling, in identifying new areas for growth, connecting the right people. And I often believe it is a good leader needs to bring three things together: ideas, people, and resources. Sometimes you start with an idea, and then your job is to try to connect people and resources. At other times, you might start with resources, or sometimes you might start with people. So that it doesn't matter, but bringing that connectivity is extremely important, and it's a dynamic process. So, and you don't know where the next new idea is going to come by. So tomorrow morning when I wake up, I read something, it sparks off a new idea, you spread the message, and you don't know who the takers are. If the message is important and the takers are many, then your job is to facilitate it. And generally, resources end up following great ideas and great people.
Yeah. Very true. I think EGDRC is one of the very uh, nice places and very creative place. And what do you think, particularly in terms of creativity, for an institution to develop or inculcate more of creative ideas, other than what you have already mentioned, are there any specific things that an institution should do to improve creativity? Because most of the institutions want creativity, but their structure often suppresses creativity. So, what do you think is maybe the top three things, or what are the things which increase creativity in a team?
Yeah, I mean, a linear plan and control model is very good for implementation. In fact, you need it for implementation. You know what needs to be done, and you know A, B, C, D that needs to be done, and it gets done. And at that level of implementation, of course, there's micro creativity, no question about it. But if you need large scale creativity, large scale innovation, large scale, radically new ideas, the system needs to be flatter. So that is why I think number one, we need a combination of systems that are linear, coexisting with systems that are horizontal, and the two respecting each other's boundaries and each other's domains, and learning to synergize with each other rather than interfering with each other. So I think the culture of the plan and control linear model should not impair the culture of the flat, seemingly confusing kind of a model. I think that is number one. The first thing, if you want creativity, you need to
Just to
do
interrupt you, when you say horizontal, you mean the complex model?
complex model, the network model, where
Okay.
where there's multiple parts of equal authority, okay, or different authority, okay. So I think that is one thing. If you want creativity, if you want high level of creativity and innovation, the network model is a better model for it. But it often gets impaired because institutions are structured through vertical models, and those vertical models, because of because of short-sightedness or because their urgency or whatever, forget that what they're doing sometimes can negatively impact the horizontal models or the network models. That is number one. So to improve creativity. Secondly, I think the only way to improve creativity is by consciously allowing divergent opinions, diversity in teams, divergent opinions, space for brainstorming to happen on a continuous basis. I mean, this to say, let's have a workshop for brainstorming does not work. Almost at every meeting, you need brainstorming to be part of it. And some of the brainstorming might lead to stupid questions, stupid answers, but okay, some of those great stupid questions will be the ones that will produce the most radical solutions. So it's okay for them to happen. Thirdly, encourage a sense that failure is part of your work. Yes, at the places you can implement known knowledge, please do it with efficiency. But in other areas, redundancy is fine. Certain level of failure is fine. I think a leader needs to encourage that. And that is where I keep saying, leader says, I'll take the blame, you take the praise. That means you're automatically empowering the individuals to fail. And finally, the idea that there is no such thing as real failure, because every failure leads to something else. So at any situation, you want to adapt. If the environment changes, do you have the ability to pivot, to repivot? Like, for example, say funding for diabetes gets reduced. but funding for kidney disease or for brain goes up, can you look at the connection between brain and diabetes or kidney and diabetes and pivot your grant towards it? You end up solving the same problem. So I think it's that ability to instantly adapt which is really important. And for all this, the answer is not protocols. The answer is curiosity, storytelling, and a sense of letting go where you need to let go.
Perfect. Perfect. So this would be probably the last question. So, any parting remarks, any last thought that you would like to share? One thing that the listeners should probably take home from this podcast.
I mean, essentially, just to summarize the main points today, a complex system is a system with many parts that are interacting, that are interconnected, which together produce new phenomena that we call emergence or new ideas that are called emergence. But that complex system requires both innate order that already exists within it and a level of innate disorder, which is what creates progress. So that is number one. Secondly, a leader in a complex system needs to operate very differently from a leader in a linear planning model. Thirdly, the role of the leader in a complex system or anybody working in a complex system is to number one, think of interaction across parts, which means leverage. You want to leverage as many components as possible, even things that you don't normally think of. So wake up every morning and say, are there partners that I have forgotten? Are there new partners I can find? And you will be surprised that people that you think are not related to your field or disciplines that you think are not related to your disciplines will soon actually be part of your discipline. Who would have imagined? Who would have imagined, for example, that AI and the eye and oculomics was going to provide an entry point to systemic diseases? Who was to imagine that statistics that was invented in agriculture was going to today sweep, epidemiology and biostatistics? Who would have imagined that the complex mathematical models developed in physics to study the universe was today going to influence our research in genetics and multiomics? So I think staying with an open mind, having a sense of curiosity and reading widely outside our own disciplines, speaking to people outside our own disciplines and subjects, I think is the message I would like to conclude this podcast with.
Wonderful, Venkat, as usual. Thank you so much for joining me today again on MindSight. And I think today we've learned so many things. I mean, it's always a pleasure listening to you. The most important things, what I liked is, again, defining the final mind, embracing failure. No failure is actually a failure. You can always repivot and living at the edge of chaos. I think this summarizes the most important things, what I'm taking back home today. And I think sometimes creating the right conditions are more important than tighter control, and that is what is important. And best leaders, as you do, don't always lead in the very traditional sense. Thank you once again, Venkat, and lovely having you again here. And thank you, listeners, for being part of MindSight. Until next time, stay curious.